Can you hear me now? Okay, great. I thought I was speaking to myself. Okay, so let me just repeat. So, morning, everyone. So, I thought before we start with Learning Unit 8, we are going to do some feedback just on Test 1. For the guys that weren't in class last week, you are welcome to go fetch your test at the assessment center to sort of see what you did wrong specifically. And so this session is just to focus on what the answer should have been based on the test and then the most common mistakes that were made. So why we're doing this is that in the event they ask something again in the exam, that you don't make the same mistakes and lose the marks again. Okay, so let's quickly go through this and then we'll continue with Learning Unit 8. So the first question was multiple choice in your test. So for question 1.1, they asked you which of the journals listed below should the following transaction be recorded. Now, what you have to see there is that they've asked you for credit purchases. Now, credit purchase is something I buy on credit. So normally when we purchase stuff, it's either in the cash book journal, cash book payment journal, or the creditors journal. Now, because it was on credit, it goes to our creditors journal. Then the following one was which of the following source documents will be used to make an entry in the debtors journal. Now remember when we talked about source documents, we have an invoice for debtors, but because we give the original to our debtor, we have the duplicate that we use. And that is then the answer, the duplicate credit invoice. Okay, now the reason they call it a credit invoice is because you've purchased on credit, otherwise they would use a cash invoice for your cash book receipts journal. Then question 1.3, which of the following transactions does not increase the bank account balance? Now remember, bank account balance is an asset. We increase it on the debit side. Now, we will increase bank generally if we receive money. So let's quickly see what type of transactions were in there. So the first one says the business receives money from customers from cash sales. So yes, that would increase your bank. The business receives a payment from a debtor settling the account. So yes, we receive cash again. Then the business receives rental money from a tenant. So our tenant is paying us. Then the business pays a supplier for goods purchased. Now that is actually the answer. So when we pay, we are actually decreasing our bank. And then the last one is we received interest on the bank account. So that is the money that was in the bank generated interest, which the bank then pays into our account, which would also increase our bank account. So in this one, the answer was now, what some of the students picked was number 2 because of the fact that they read payment and didn't read the entire sentence carefully. In question 1.4, in the general ledger, the details column is used for which of the following details? Okay, now remember the details column in our general ledger is generally for our contra account. So that's the other account that we're using. So if you missed that we're busy with the general ledger, you would have then either put in the name of the debtor, name of the creditor, or none of the above was the answers that I saw. So it was very important that you saw it related to the general ledger, which is also our T account. Then question 1.5, purchases are classified as, and this is where you had to that chart of accounts that you studied. This would have helped you actually get to the answer. So purchases is an expense because it's money that is flowing out of our business, but it doesn't actually increase our liabilities as such. Then the next one is assuming ABC Trading uses a periodic inventory system. So the first thing you have to see is it's a periodic inventory system. Cost of sales would be determined as follows. Now, when we have a periodic inventory system, because of the fact that we're taking everything to the purchaser's account, we have to calculate the cost of sales at the end of the year, which would include your opening inventory balance. All your expense accounts are added onto it, and then you deduct your closing inventory account. So let's quickly see what they had. So the first one says opening inventory plus your purchases plus carriage on purchases plus import on tariffs less closing inventory. Okay, so that is correct. If we look at the other ones, the second one, we deducted carriage on purchase, we deducted custom duties, which made it incorrect. The third one, we deducted the purchases, which made it incorrect. And the fourth one, we've added everything. We didn't deduct the closing trading inventory. So for that reason, number one would have been the correct one. Then 1.7, now this one caught a lot of students out because of the fact that they give you a lot of information, but if you did the calculation, you wouldn't actually have seen any of the answers. So they ask you, using the following information, calculate the cost of sales amount. Now remember, cost of sales on the periodic, you take the opening inventory plus the purchases plus the transport, and then the storage costs are generally excluded, and then you take off the closing inventory. Now if you do that calculation, you actually get to 95,000. So I've done the calculation here. So you take the opening inventory, you added the purchases, added the transport, and take off the closing balance, then you would have received 95, which is none of the above answers. If you added the storage fees, you would have got to number 2. Okay, so in this scenario, the storage cost, because it is just before we are selling the items, those items were already in a condition to be sold, so we wouldn't have included that amount. Then question 1.8, a credit purchase of inventory would be recorded as follow using the perpetual inventory system. Now, it's a credit purchase. That's the one thing you have to see. So when we buy it on credit, it will not go to our bank account. It will go to creditor's account. Perpetual inventory, we take the inventory to an asset account and not an expense account. So for that reason, number 3 would be correct. We would debit the inventory, so we're increasing our inventory balance, the inventory have on hand, and we would credit the creditor's control. Then question 1.9, the inventory should initially be recorded at the following value. So this was just theory. So we said initially it is recorded at cost, and then subsequently we would recognize it at the lower of your cost or your net realizable value. So the answer for this one is cost. And then the last one, if a perpetual inventory system is used and the owner takes trading inventory for their own use, the following journal entry would be recorded. Now remember, when we take inventory for our own use, it's called drawings. Okay, so that's the first thing, perpetual inventory system. Because we have that system, it would go against the inventory account and not the purchases account. So based on that, it would have been either number 1 or 3, but because of the fact that we're busy with the perpetual, it is number 1. Okay, so that is the multiple choice questions and how you should have answered it. Now, in the last one, people got confused between perpetual and periodic, so they either picked 1 or 3, or they forgot that it is drawings, it goes to, or they swapped it around and picked number 5. So before I move on from the multiple choice questions, do you have any questions on this? Okay, you can just show me emoji in the chat function. Are you okay with the multiple choice questions, or do you have any questions on what I've just discussed? Okay, so let's move on to question 2 then. So in question 2, what they've asked you is they've given you information. They haven't given you a lot of information in question number 2, but then they've asked you specifically to complete the following journals. So the debtors journal, debtors allowance journal, the cash book receipts, and in brackets they told you banking takes place on a daily basis. Now the reason they tell you that is because of the fact that if you bank it on a daily basis, your bank and your analysis of receipts would be the same. And then your general ledgers, narrations are required. If they tell you narrations are required, you will receive a mark for it. Okay, now what was important in this to see is that your business is registered for VAT, so VAT would be applicable when you do the journals. VAT is 15%, and then they tell you we are using the perpetual inventory system, so you would expect to see an inventory column in your journals, or you would have to use inventory in your general ledger depending on what was asked, and your markup is 30% on selling price. Now remember, 30% on selling price would mean selling price is 100, and then your cost would be the 100 less the 30 to get to 70. But I'll repeat that again when we get there. So let's quickly just read through the transactions. So the first one, Gemini, which is the owner, gave additional cash contributions. So that would automatically go to your cash book receipts journal. Then the second one is R. Wanden, a credit sale of trading inventory. So when we sell something on credit, it goes to debtors journal. Then on the 15th, he returned trading inventory. So we said when goods are returned or you get a rebate, it goes to your debtors allowance journal. Now, some students got confused between what goes to the debtors journal, what goes to the debtors allowance journal. So they had the correct entries, but in the incorrect journal. Okay, then the fourth one was Gemini took inventory for the personal use. Now this went to the general journal. That journal was the one where most students actually lost easy marks because of the fact that they forgot how to document it. So I'll show you what it should look like and then just explain the basic concepts again. And then the last one was S. Stokey received rental income. So that's money you received, so that's also in your cash book receipts. Now let's quickly look at what the answer should have looked like. Okay, so if you completed the debtors journal, you would have received a half a mark for the document number. For the document number to receive the mark, you had to include the entire document number, not only the numbers here at the end, because of the fact that each document has a different abbreviation in the front. So lost the marks. You got a half a mark for the day, a half a mark for the detail. Now the details is the name of the person that either you sold it to or who made the payment. So what a lot of people did that lost marks here, they would have written either like cash or credit or bank. They would have given me, or debtors control, they gave me an account name and not the details of the person that made the sale or made the payment. Now the debtor control was 120,000 if we just go back. So they've given you the 120. They said all these amounts are already inclusive of that. So what happens now is you start with 120 and now you had to go work out the VAT component. Now where students lost marks here is instead of the 15 over 115, they multiplied it with 15%. Because they forgot that this amount was already inclusive of VAT. If you did the VAT correctly, you would have received a mark and a half here. And then sales would have been the difference between your debtors control and the output VAT you've calculated. Now, if you've calculated the output VAT incorrectly, we would have given you a method mark for the sales, but it would have only been about a half a method mark. You would have received the 1.5 if it was correct. Now, a lot of students lost marks with the cost of sales because of the fact that you missed that it was on selling price, which made the selling price 100% instead of 130. So a lot of students actually got the cost of sales incorrect because of the fact that you've applied the markup percentage incorrectly. So just to repeat it, if your markup is on selling price, your selling price should equal 100% and not 100 plus the profit percentage. The profit percentage would remain 30, but then your cost would have been 70. So then you take the sales amount and you multiply it with 70 over 100. Now, the other mistake students made is they took the 120 year, which was inclusive of that, and then applied the profit margin or the markup percentage, which also gave them an incorrect amount. Then debtors allowance, you would have filled in exactly the same information as the other one. So your document number, the day, the details was R1 then. Your debtors control amount was 20,000 and you would have applied the information exactly the same. Now for returns, they won't give you the markup percentage again. You apply the same one you've applied to your debtors journal. So that is just something to remember. Now if we move on to the cash book receipts, you would have had two entries there. The one from Gemini, which was the owner giving money or a capital contribution, and then Stoke that paid rental amount. Now, where a lot of students lost marks is here with the analysis of receipts or the bank column. So some students only included the amounts in the analysis of receipts, but never in the bank column, or they've included it in the bank column, but never in the analysis of receipts. You would have lost the easy mark if you didn't include it into both. Okay, so that was one of the common mistakes. Then remember, your account name is capital. If you had capital contribution or any other thing, we didn't mark it correctly. The other thing a lot of students missed is that your rental income includes VAT. So you had to take out a VAT component here. If you forgot about the VAT, we would have given you a method mark here for the sundry amount that you've included. And then the last thing is it needs to be rental income or rent income. You can't just say rent because we also have a rent expense account. So you need to be very specific whether it's income or expense before you would have received a mark here at the back. Now the general journal, this is where most students actually did not actually get any marks. The only marks people got was for the document number and the day. Now, you'll see here under the details, these are your account names. You do not give the details of the person that made the contribution or took the stock. You give the account name, so the other general ledger account. So our T account, so your contra account. So you would have debited the drawings account because we took the inventory out of the account. You will receive the half a mark for that. Then you had to take out the output VAT or raise output VAT and trading inventory. Now, it's very important when we take stock out of the business, SARS will not allow us to claim that input VAT anymore. So you have to reverse it and you take it to the output VAT account. And then that drawings amount is generally the cost amount of the goods and not the sales amount. So what a lot of students got wrong is they included the 8,000 there, which was the sales value and not the cost of sales. So you had to take the 8,000 and then apply the 70% to get to 5,600, and you would have received 2 marks for that. Then you would have applied the VAT to get to the VAT component. You would have received 2 marks for that. And then the trading inventory would have been the balancing figure, which would have been half a mark. Now, because they've asked for narrations, you would have said the owner took goods for his personal use or something in that line. You would have received half a mark for the narrations. Now, where a lot of students lost marks is firstly here with the details. They did not have the correct account names. Secondly, They used 8,000 instead of the 5,600. And then the other thing, most people forgot about the VAT, which because I marked it based on what you had, and then they didn't put a narration in here. And then the other thing is they swapped it around. So where drawings would have been a debit, they would have made it a credit and vice versa. So they got confused with what is a debit account, what is a credit account. Okay, so those were the main issues with question 2. But this question was the best answered out of the test. So question 1, the average was about 5 out of 10, whereas question 2, the average was about 70%. So this question actually went fairly well. So where most people lost their marks was generally here at the general journal. Question 3 was the correction of errors. Now, what happened here is we did a question like this in class where they gave you the trial balance in the beginning, and then they gave you the trial balance in the beginning. You had to make correction journal entries, and then you had to adjust your trial balance. Now, what happened in this question is a lot of students did the correction journals. So either you swapped it around, but then you lost your marks because you did not complete the question by adding the 2 columns to get to your new trial balances. Or you didn't add up the corrections, the totals to get a balance there at the bottom, and then you would have lost more marks. So let's quickly go through this and just refresh our memory. So this question is based on question 5.6 in your textbooks. They've amended it slightly. So what happened is they told you the business uses manual bookkeeping system. They registered for VAT, which means you have to account for VAT. VAT is 15%. Then they've given you the trial balance. So they've got you the statement of financial position, which is your balance sheet items, which is your assets, liabilities, and owner's equity accounts. Then you've got your nominal accounts, which is your income and expense accounts. Then there were 5 errors you had to correct. So the first one is the owner made a capital contribution in the form of a personal check for 5,000 drawn in favor of the business, but this transaction has not been recorded. So what they're basically saying is your owner deposited 5,000 bucks as part of a capital contribution into our bank account. That's all it's saying. So that would mean we would increase our capital account with 5,000. We would increase our bank account with 5,000. There would be no VAT implication. Because it has not been recorded, it has not been accounted for in these balances. Then they tell you when balancing the bank account in the general ledger, the credit side of the account was undercost by 200, and this mistake was carried forward when the account was balanced. Okay, so the bank account, so that's your T account in the general ledger. The credit side of the account was undercost. So when we have a T account on the credit, we show our debits was undercost by 200 Rand and the mistake was carried forward. So that means our bank balance is 200 Rand too little because of the fact that we didn't add up the T account correctly. So in this case, what happened is a lot of students put it on the credit side because they forgot that the credit side of a T account is actually your debit side. Then the creditors control column in the cash book payments was not posted to the general ledger. Okay, so if we have cash book payments, that's when we made payments. So our creditors control, because we're paying it, that means our creditors balance will decrease, so we will actually debit it. So a lot of students had the correct amount, but they credited this amount instead of debiting it. Then number 4, there was an error, but we've marked it based on how you've interpreted it. So it should have actually read that this amount is inclusive of VAT. But because of the fact that they didn't say that, there was additional entries that needed to be made. So based on how you documented this, we would have marked it based on the 2 options. So the vehicle was bought on credit. So if it's on credit, it shouldn't have gone to bank. It should have gone to creditors control for 5,250, and the following double entry was made. So the error would have actually only been the fact that we've taken it to the bank account instead of the creditors control account. That is what it should have been. That is what the amount should have been. But because of the fact that they've had an error here, you would have had to add an additional VAT component of 103 Rand, and your vehicles was about 683 Rand additional that you had to include there if you read it with excluding that. But we've marked both options based on how students read it because it was a typo on our side. The stationery column in the petty cash journal was undercast. Now what that means is we didn't add it up correctly. It was less than it should have been. So stationery column in your petty cash journal was undercast. So that means our stationery needs to increase and our petty cash needs to decrease with 110. Now prepare a basic general ledger reconciliation. So what a general ledger reconciliation is, we're taking the opening trial balance, we're correcting the errors, and we get to the new trial balance. So let's quickly see what it would have looked like. So you initially had the incorrect trial balance, which they gave you. Then there was a difference here at the bottom that you can't see now. Let me quickly see if I can just open the Excel. So the difference, there was a difference of 2,310 Rand, which you would have seen there at the bottom if you've looked at the difference between the totals. Then the recommended adjustments, these were now the individual transactions that you had to do. We had to do the debit and credit. Now the first entry, we said we contributed capital, which is 5,000. We increased the capital account and we increased the bank account with 5,000. Then the second entry, if we go back, was the balancing of the bank account was under cost. Not under cost, it was the credit side of the account was under cost by 200 Rand, and this mistake was carried forward. Okay, so 200 Rand was included in there. Then we had our creditors control column. There's the 2,400, which was not taken to this account yet. Oh, sorry. Then we've got the vehicle one. Now the vehicle one, you've got your 525 here. Now because of the fact that that amount should have been inclusive of VAT, instead of the 525 on the credit side, it is now 6038. You would have adjusted the vehicle's amount with 685 and the input with 103. Now because that was an error, there was no marks allocated to that, but we marked it. If you put 5250 there, we would have given you the mark there as well. And then the 110 here to the stationery column, which was under cost. You had to take here. Now, where students lost marks is here at the bottom. You did not add up your debit and your credit column. That's 2 marks that you lost. So even if you made a mistake up here, you would have received the method mark here at the bottom. Then a lot of students did not add up this column. Or if they added up, they did it incorrectly. So remember, you can either have a debit or a credit, but you can't have a debit and a credit in this column. So you have to look at, if there's a debit and a credit entry, you have to look at which side is the bigger one and then deduct the other side. So in this case, it would have been the 250 plus the 5,000. If you made a mistake here, you would have received the method mark of half a mark there. Then these ones were half a marks because you basically just took the amount here. There were hardly any adjustments and you received half a mark. The same here at the bottom. Now, because a lot of students didn't add these up, they've actually lost about 4 or 5 marks just by the fact that they didn't do this last bit. And then the totals was another 2 marks. So there was a lot of marks just by adding up basic concepts. Even if you missed this, you could have still done fairly well in this question. So this was the main things that students struggled with. So we knew they would struggle with this, but then the basic things here, we're adding the yellow column with the orange column to get to the new balance. That is basic concepts where you lost easy marks. So either you did not have enough time to finish it or you forgot the basic concept. Okay. Let's see if there's anything else. No, so that is basically what test one was all about. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. Is there any questions that you guys have on test one? Is there anything that you're wondering about or that you have additional questions on or just general feedback you want to give? You can just type, if you've got any questions, you can type it into the chat function. If you're okay, just let me know. Okay, so Terry says he's fine. Anyone else? Okay, so overall, I don't think test one went too bad. I know question three reduced the marks quite a bit because most students actually did fairly well in question one and question two, and then I could see in question three you lost marks either because you might not have had time or you didn't exactly understand what was required of you. But overall, I think based on what my expectations were, I think you guys actually did quite well considering this is an additional subject. I know you guys don't always enjoy accounting, but well done on most of you actually passed this test. So well done on that. That is an achievement. So now we're going to now continue with learning unit 8, which you will see in the exam. Now, I'm going to focus today on the recording of your sales and wages journals so that we can then see how would you actually account for it. I'm just going to share my screen quickly.